Welcome back. I'm Gila Ross, author of Living Beautifully and host of the Power podcast, where we share short, relatable ideas to impact and upgrade your everyday life. Why do we celebrate Jewish holidays? Like, what's the point of celebrating, for example, Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot?
Tradition.
Okay.
To remember what Hashem did for us, like the miracles.
Most of us, when you think about the holidays, we think about like we're commemorating some sort of miracle, right? Passover, we're commemorating getting out of Egypt. Shavuot, we're celebrating like this mass revelation. It's some sort of miracle. If you think about it, in Jewish history, there were a lot of miracles. So why did some of them that became festivals and some of them not? For example, why do we celebrate that we came out of Egypt, but we don't celebrate when they went into Israel and they conquered Israel? Why do we celebrate Purim, where we were saved, but we don't celebrate, for example, when we were saved from the Assyria another time? What makes a miracle? You know, I'm reminded of a story that's told in the Talmud, right? Where I think it was Rabbi Hanina, his wife, he comes home on Friday and his daughter tells him, we've run out of oil. So he says to her, okay, so take some vinegar and light the Shabbat candles with vinegar, because whoever said to the oil that you should light will tell the vinegar to light. So what does it mean? Is that he lived with this recognition that everything came from God. So for him, when he saw the oil burning, to him it was miraculous. It was God's doing, right? So for him, there was no difference between the oil lighting and the vinegar lighting, because it's all, miraculous. But for us, most of us, I think when we see the oil lighting, we see oil catch fire or whatever, we don't think much about it. But you hear about something incredible, like what happens when Iran attacked Israel, then you kind of sit up and say, hey, hold on a second. Maybe there's something more to this story. So I think what a miracle does is it shows us that there's a God, right? And there's a God who's involved in our life, right? So let's go back to why were some miracles chosen to be celebrated as a holiday and some of them not? Here's the thing, right? In order for an event in history to become a holiday, what it had to do was it had to teach the world, teach us Jews a new lesson. So, for example, what do we learn about God or Judaism from the fact that God took us out of Egypt?
That there is a God.
Exactly, because what God did at Egypt was he demonstrated, and it was the first time in history that he demonstrated so clearly that I am in charge of nature, right? It's not just that God created the world many years ago and let it be, right? It's that God created the world and continues to be involved in the world until this day. That's a fundamental lesson. That is a foundational belief in Judaism, that we believe that not only is God creator, but God is involved in our lives. So that's something that teaches us that. So the next holiday that was going to be introduced or made as a holiday has to bring a new lesson. It can't just be to show us as a God, right? So if that's the case, the Purim story, right, where Haman and Achashverosh wanted to kill all the Jews, and miraculously Mordecai and Esther managed to foil the plot and they got saved. Why did that become a festival? What's the unique lesson of Purim? What's the lesson that we kind of learn from Purim that we don't learn? Let's say you're going to turn around to me and tell me it's to know that God is involved in our lives, right? That can't be enough, because Passover already teaches us that. Yeah.
To me, what is different about Purim is that a woman saved the people.
So it's interesting, because Hanukkah also has a woman that saved it. Yehudis was Judith. What she did is what she did was that she went to the king and served him cheese and wine, and when he got very content and happy and fell asleep. She killed him, cut his head off, and paraded it through the streets. And that was a moment when the Jewish people, their morale was very low because they thought, we're never going to win these Greeks. And when she came out and showed them that the head of the king, so that's when they got that the morale was boosted and they were able to do it.
The Greeks, did they kind of fall apart without their leader too?
Yeah.
Or?
Yes, that as well. From Purim, we learn that the Jewish people cannot be destroyed. Am Yisrael Chai. That is true, and we have a promise already in the Torah for that, right? So we're looking for something. Let's put the questions to the side for the moment, right? And let's look at something else. If you look through the Torah, what happens when the Jews mess up, when the Jews sin? Does the Torah gloss over it, or does the Torah? No. The Torah calls the Jews to task, right? If they commit adultery, the Torah calls them to task. If they build a tower to rebel against God, the Torah writes about it, right? Every single, and sometimes, you look at it and like, especially with the righteous people, it's almost like nitpicking, right? These tiny little things that they do wrong is the Torah does that. The Torah pulls it apart. Why? Because the Torah wants us to learn from it, right? So there's no point in whitewashing something, because the Torah, let's say the Torah wants to teach us that, look what happens when you serve idols. This is the moral decline of society. So it's going to talk to us about it. It's going to talk to us about how we should do better. Now, what's very interesting is if you look through the 24 books of Tanakh, right, of Torah, of the 5 books of Moses and the writings and the prophets, not once are the Jews called to task for denying God. They're called to task for serving idols. They're called to task for rebelling against God. They're called to task for not listening to God. But they're never told off that, why are you saying there is no God? Why do you think that they never did that?
Because they've seen what God has done.
Beautiful, right?
So they know there is a God.
There's 2 phases in Jewish history. The first phase in Jewish history was a phase where God had open miracles, right? So imagine someone's coming out of Egypt and they saw the Nile turn into blood. They saw the frogs. They walk through the splitting of the sea. How can they turn around and say there is no God, right? Like they can't. God is so clear and apparent in the world that they can't do it, right? Nowadays, we're in a second phase of Jewish history, and that phase of world history, we're holding on to a rope, right? Faith, we're holding on to a rope, but God is so hidden that it's almost like that rope of faith is being violently shaken. So like it's hard to hold on, and not just is it hard to see God. Sometimes in our life we almost feel the opposite. We almost feel like, where are you, God? Like, why have you, I'm trying so hard, I'm doing this, that, and the other. Like, where are you? Right? So we have the opposite here. Now, I wanna share with you a story. So this took place in Russia, where they were the mandatory draft for the army, and they were terrible to the Jews. So there was this guy whose name was, let's call him Mendel, who was in the army. And the conditions were awful, but he was whatever. They had to do what they had to do. And then one of the other people that was in the unit with him, his name was Ackerman, was also a Jew, but he was like a confirmed atheist, right? He's a communist. He said, I don't believe in God. I don't believe in any of it. Comes up to Rosh Hashanah one year, and for some reason they happen to have off on that day. So Mendel says, and a bunch of the other Jews say, we're going to go into the nearest town and we're going to go to the synagogue and pray. It's Rosh Hashanah. Ackerman says, I'm going to go to the nearest town. I'm not going to pray. I don't believe in any of that stuff, right? So he goes into town, and the nearest town, and as he's going in, he hears the sound of a shofar. And there's something about hearing and experiencing that sound of the shofar that stirs within him, right? And he walks into the shul, and he cries and he prays like every other single person there. The next day, that unit was called into action. Unfortunately, only 7 of them came back alive. Ackerman was not one of them. So most people who hear about this story would not know. They would think that Ackerman died as an atheist, right? It was only because Ackerman told Mendel his experience, right? That Mendel knew that the day before he died, right? It was when he something stirred within him, some sort of experience stirred within him, and he rebuilt that connection with God. Now, if we look at our lives, how do we find God in our lives? How do we build a connection to in our life? And sometimes, there's the saying that said, "You're atheist in a foxhole," right? A lot of times, you're in desperate conditions. I need to get the job. Right? Then we remember God. Right? We remember to call out to God to ask Him. Or, God forbid, someone's very sick and there's nowhere else to turn, and we feel. I remember talking to a friend once, and she told me her daughter didn't get into high school, and she said, "I felt totally alone, so I turned to God." Which is valid. If you're turning to God in difficulties, it's a good thing, but we don't want to have to wait. We don't want the difficulties in order to connect to God. So is there an easier way, a more pleasant way to find God in our lives?
Gratitude, like every day I'm thanking Hashem for everything in my life.
So in order to thank Hashem, you have to recognize that it's from God. That's a prerequisite, right? So how do we strengthen ourselves, and how do we recognize that things are from God? Because someone else can have family and not recognize that there's a God, right? Because it's different, right? Like when you're walking through the split sea, everyone recognizes a God, right? When I wake up in the morning and I can get out of bed and I can stand up straight, is it a miracle from God? Yes. Do I recognize it as a miracle from God? Most of the time, not. If I've happened to have a terrible backache for a week beforehand, and I get up one morning and I feel better, then maybe I'll recognize that as something from God. So what's the more pleasant way of recognizing the things that come from God? A lot of times we recognize that God's there for us when we're in a difficult situation, right? Like God forbid you need a job and you pray to God, or you God forbid someone's sick and you pray to God for healing. But we want to recognize
every day.
Yeah. And also we don't want to be in a situation where God has to give us something difficult so that we recognize that it's God, to build that connection. So what's the easier way? I think a lot of us are taking this idea that, what I have in my life that comes from God, is for granted, right? Which is already a level. There's a level of faith and trust in that. What's interesting is that Purim is the festival that introduced us to it. What do I mean? Imagine if someone who's an atheist reads through the 5 books of Moses. It's a very hard read because God is the main character. God is all over it. Someone who's an atheist reads through the book of Esther that we read on Purim. God's name isn't mentioned in the Megillah even once. Right? So a person, in theory, could be an atheist and still celebrate Purim, right? It's great celebration. It's not like, Shavuot, where I celebrate that God gave us the Torah. You've got to believe in that. And Purim, we were in danger. We got saved through, and what's interesting is how did we get saved? We got saved through these series of little coincidences, a bunch of little coincidences that took place over 9 years that led to us being saved from a situation which seemed absolutely hopeless, because the Haman decreed that all the Jews were going to get wiped out. He made it a law, and the law was in that time that once a law was put into place, it couldn't be revoked. The Mordecai, when he came around, he had to put a new law in, saying that the Jews can defend themselves. So they were saved from the most horrific, hopeless situation, but not in an open miracles way where God is splitting the sea, in a way where it just happened to be that Ahasuerus killed Vashti, and it just happened to be that Ahasuerus chose Esther, this Jewish girl, for his wife, and it just happened to be that Mordecai overheard a plot and was able to save the king's life, and it just happened to be that Haman, got angry with Mordecai at the same time that Ahasuerus was sleeping, right? It's all these series of coincidences. It's almost like you don't need to believe in God to actually celebrate Purim. But a thoughtful person, if they read through the Megillah, if they read through the story, the experience changes us. Why? Because I'm saying if you read through a story, right, you put yourself in the place of the people that were there. Imagine you were living in Esther and in Esther and Mordecai's times. You were one of the Jews. You heard about this decree that Haman put into place. What would it be like for you? What would you feel like?
Fear,
You know, like
Anger.
but hopelessness, like terror,
powerlessness.
and you know that they did feel like the Megillah talks about the Jews were terror. It was terrorizing for them because they it looked like there was no way out. So if you follow the story along, right, and then you hear about, oh, this crazy thing, Haman is marching his arch enemy Mordecai through the streets on the king's hall. Oh, and the Haman Esther seems to be on the side of Ahasuerus with Haman. She's inviting them to this party, and then all of a sudden it changes, right? And Haman the Ahasuerus turns against Haman, and Haman is hung on the gallows, and everything changes, right? What would it be like for you to go through that experience?
I would see it as a miracle.
Exactly, right? If you're going through that experience, you're not sitting there and thinking, we were supposed to be wiped out. But what's the statistic probability that the king would have chosen a Jewish girl, right? You're not thinking that. You're thinking like, it looked terrible. And now it saved us. And that must be God, right? You experience it. And I don't know if anyone has ever had an experience like that in your life where you kind of feel like, things like are awful, and then something happens, right? And you just feel like it's God, right? We call those moments hashgacha prasis, right? When divine intervention, when it's the hand of God, right? Like it could be seen as a coincidence, or or you can see it as divine intervention, right? And that choice is ours, right? It's not like it's not an open miracle that people can't deny, but it's still and I think for the people that are witnessing it, right? There's a story that I read of a taxi driver in Israel. So he was giving this rabbi a ride in his taxi. The taxi driver was telling him, I have to tell you this crazy story that happened. Just after we finished the army, me and a bunch of friends went traveling, right? And they were camping out in some sort of jungle, and they said they come into the tent, and they see that there is a snake wrapped around the neck of one of their friends, and they realized that there was no way to get this snake off their friend. So they turn to their friend and they say, start saying Shema, right? And he said Shema, and the snake came off his neck and slithered away. Right? And he said, the taxi driver said, my friend, he was so, it was such a powerful experience for him that he became religious because of it. So the rabbi said to him, he said, what about you? Right? You also the thing is, he was like, well, it didn't happen to me. But the point
you
is,
witnessed it.
Yes, you witnessed it. And I think, the sensitivity is to witness something and to let that feeling change us. Like when you go from something that seems so absolutely hopeless, and then something smaller, happens, and it's like, wow, there's a God in my life. There's a God who loves me and cares about me and is maneuvering my life. And it's like, who's, as you said, it's like making sure that this is the job I get and this is the job I don't get, right? And saving me from marrying that person, saving me from whatever it is. All those things, that's like God maneuvering the world. And the Purim story happened. It was the beginning of the time when God is hidden in the world, right? There's two rabbinic festivals, Hanukkah, and even the rabbinic ones are hinted at in Torah. So we asked, how is Purim hinted at? There's a phrase in the Torah where God says, Anochi haste aste es panai. I will surely hide my face from you. God is talking about the times we live in right now, right? That God is running the world and in a hidden way. Right? And the Purim story took place just after the temple was destroyed, just after the open miracles ended, just after the prophecy ended. And it taught us, just because there's no open miracles doesn't mean that God is intimately involved in our life. And it taught us to look for those little things, right? Those little coincidences that happen, like all those things that you were saying, the recognizing the blessings that we have from God. Like it taught us how to look for those so that we can feel God's presence in our life. Any thoughts, any questions?
I heard something about coincidence means from God.
The Hebrew word for coincidence is mikra. And if you move the letters around, you can reword it into the two words rak me Hashem, only from God.
Okay.
Yeah. Again, that's our choice. Our choice is, and it's not just a choice. It's also it's something we train ourselves in, right? It's a sensitivity that we develop.
They say there are no coincidences. Everything happens for a reason. That reason is Hashem.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Have a happy
Thank
Purim.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. I'd love to hear your feedback, and if you enjoyed this episode, you'll love my book, Living Beautifully: How to Bring Meaning, Joy, and Love into Your Life, based on the timeless wisdom of Pirkei Avot. And please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out. Have a wonderful day.